Good morning, guys. I'm Juan, and today I'm going to be presenting a TED Talk about how I believe that Latin culture is sometimes just not understood and accepted by most people. And this whole common view that due to sometimes stereotypes and misconceptions people have about the culture itself, it's viewed as inferior and kind of simplistic compared to others. And through this presentation, I hope to change your perception on how you view Latin culture, hopefully inform you something about it that you perhaps didn't know. And hopefully, by the end, you'll want to experience it more and learn more about it. And as a whole, this will create a whole social change where Latin culture is viewed with the respect that it deserves. Okay. So, raise your hand if you can identify yourself with a particular culture. No surprise, most people can. However, how would you feel if your culture was just sometimes not accepted or just not understood? If it was viewed as inferior? If it was just ignored sometimes? Let me start off by sharing a little story with you. In 2004, I moved from Argentina to the United States. My first day of school, my teacher introduced me to the class. A swarm of American kids surrounded me, all assuming that I was from Mexico and that I didn't know how to speak English. But when I replied with a simple, "I'm Juan, and I'm from Argentina," they were blown away. Ever since that day, it's consistently come to my attention the lack of understanding and acceptance of Latin culture, and the common view that Latin culture and its people are inferior. Latin culture and its people are not inferior because of their ethnicity, and Latin culture is one of the richest and most diverse cultures in the world. I believe one major factor or cause of this common view of Latin culture as inferior is because of a very big misconception in the geographical field people tend to have. Mexico is not South America. It seems to me that everyone believes, or everyone acknowledges Mexico as the only country in South America. As a matter of fact, in a study conducted by the USCIS, 21% of people admitted to believing that Mexico is the Latin continent itself, and that there were other provinces inside it, such as Peru. The belief that Mexico is the Latin continent itself is a misconception, not a fact. The fact is, Mexico is one country. Mexico is home to 4 ethnicities, and Mexico is home to 112.3 million people. Another fact is, Latin America is home to 28 countries. Latin America is home to over 30 ethnicities, each different in their own way. And Latin America is home to 429.5 million people. Sure, Mexico and Latin America do have many similarities, and they can be combined together to form one big culture. But by perceiving that Mexico is Latin America itself, it's the same thing as taking one Hispanic in every four and just ignoring those other 3 cultures, traditions, languages, and beliefs. And that's 429.5 million people that have just been ignored. This common geographical misconception has a lot of negative effects on Hispanics in their daily lives, Hispanics including myself. Perhaps the most prominent of these is stereotyping. Stereotyping is a very serious common mistake people make when they categorize millions of people under one general statement that's not necessarily applicable to all. This affects Latin Americans in the way that, because of this geographical mistake people tend to make, they believe that all stereotypes that are applicable to Mexicans are applicable to Latin Americans, when in reality, there's no correlation at all. This really greatly impacts the life daily of Hispanics all over the world, including myself. And it really makes us look a lot more inferior than we truly are. Standing in front of this classroom, as society would view me, I'm a 16-year-old Mexican teenager, illegal immigrant, drug dealer, gardener, construction worker, and cartel worker. It would be alright if these stereotypes were at least remotely applicable to me, but I'm actually a 16-year-old Argentine student, not a drug dealer. Isn't it strange how only 24% of Latin Americans living in the United States work in the gardening and construction business, yet everywhere I go I'm labeled only as a gardener and only as a construction worker? Isn't it strange how actually 89% of Latinos living in the United States actually reside there legally, yet in airports and everywhere, Latinos are labeled as illegal immigrants? Isn't it really kind of weird that 27% of players in the major leagues of baseball, America's pastime, including greats such as Miguel Cabrera, who a lot of people know, are all of Hispanic descent, yet Latinos are labeled as gardeners, construction workers, and drug dealers, but not athletes? People are generalizing Hispanics and basing their impressions on stereotypes too often, and they're not basing them off of facts. This whole stereotyping adds to the whole perception that Latin culture is inferior, which is not true. And Latin culture is very affected daily by these stereotypes, and it has increased this whole perception that Latin culture is inferior. I am Latino, and I couldn't be more proud of it. Latin culture is spread far beyond the boundaries of the Andes, where tacos are sold as far as Thailand, and salsa is danced nearly 9,000 kilometers away from South America. Many Latinos live all over the world in multiple countries, occupying prestigious positions in multi-million-dollar corporations. Latino athletes such as Miguel Cabrera dominate baseball. Latino artists such as Shakira dominate the charts. The condition of being inferior is being less than or not of the same quality of another. And let me ask you this: what's so inferior about Latin culture? Latin culture is one of the richest and most diverse cultures in the world. Hopefully after this presentation you will take the time to explore it and experience it, and maybe learn more about it, something you didn't know. And you will not be disappointed, I guarantee you that. Latin culture is one of the greatest cultures in the world, and hopefully it is about time that people began to view it with the admiration and respect that it truly deserves. Thank you. So,
Sure.
In part one of this course titled Language in a Cultural Context, I have attempted to analyze how audience and purpose affect the structure and content of a text to catalyze social change through the presentation. In this presentation, my purpose was to increase the understanding and the acceptance of Latin culture through presenting facts and informing my audience of how Latin culture is actually not inferior, and how it is actually one of the richest cultures in the world. In this presentation, my audience was no one in particular. It was mostly just people who don't really know that much about Hispanic culture, and maybe go with this common negative portrayal that stereotypes and mistakes people have about the culture itself create. And hopefully through this presentation, those people were informed and maybe changed their perception and were more encouraged to learn more about it. In this presentation, I used a plethora of literary devices, such as tone, rhetorical questions, rhetorical devices, colloquial language, parallelism, and tone. So first off, the tone that this presentation was given, it was more of a kind of like harsh and informative tone. This is to build pathos, to strike emotion of how I feel when people don't view my culture with the same degree that I feel it deserves. And if you felt uncomfortable a little bit, just like I was yelling at you or angry at you, this was for you to feel like that's how I felt and how I get angry and upset sometimes when my culture is generalized and when it's not really understood by other people. I used rhetorical questions all over my speech. Just asking questions like, how is it that 89% of the Latinos living in the United States are actually living there legally? And I use this to have a self-realization in my audience, to really get them thinking about these facts and really help them realize the truth about Hispanic culture, which maybe they didn't know before. I used rhetorical questions in various parts of my speech, including also in the part where basically I use them to have self-realizations with my audience and to help them understand my topic better. I used colloquial language throughout my speech to keep the speech conversational and interesting to listen to. I tried to use words that were not too difficult or too complex to not confuse my audience, but rather to keep them entertained and make my presentation easy to understand, so the audience can take more away from it. I also used a lot of parallelism in my speech. Notice in the part where I talked about Mexico as one country, 4 ethnicities, and 112.3 million people, I contrasted that to Latin America in its whole, to show people the degree of difference between Mexico and Latin America as two different entities, so people realize that there is a very significant difference. And I did that visually and also verbally. In addition, I also showed how there are some negative stereotypes of Latin Americans and also some positive stereotypes that are not really fulfilled. So how I said those stereotypes about how they're viewed as illegal immigrants and how they're viewed as drug dealers. But then I asked about how they are not viewed as athletes. So I showed two different rhetorical questions, one showing a negative aspect and the other one showing a positive aspect, to show the contrast between how people view one but they don't view the other. I also used the rhetorical device of ethos. I presented a personal anecdote in the beginning to display my credibility as a person speaking about Hispanic culture, because I am Hispanic and I have experienced the effects that this whole lack of understanding and acceptance of the culture itself has on people, including myself. And I also stated that I was Latino in the speech itself. And then I also built logos by including facts and numbers and statistics, such as the percentages that I included of the 1 in 4 Hispanics that are 3 in 4 Hispanics that are ignored, and the 34%, the 24% of Latinos that work in the gardening construction business, and the 89% that live legally. So those facts will numerically show the truth about Latin culture. And a combination of all those literary devices helped me portray my purpose of hopefully increasing the understanding and acceptance of Latin culture and to diminish the